In the heart of a rural region surrounded by endless fields and red dirt roads lived Antonio Valenza, a respected, hard-working, and quiet farmer. At 58 years old, he carried on his shoulders not only the weight of daily labor with cattle and land, but also the deep pain of a loss that never healed, the death of his wife, Helena, taken by a fast and cruel illness. Since the funeral, the big house farm became a cold place. Long hallways echoed with lonely footsteps, and the couple's bedroom remained closed, as if time itself had stopped there. Antonio kept living, but only out of obligation. He woke before dawn, worked until sunset, and went to bed early, trying to escape the thoughts that returned every night. What almost no one knew was that besides his wife, Antonio had lost something else during that same period: his relationship with his own daughter. Clara, his only daughter, was just 9 years old when her mother died. Fragile, quiet, and extremely sensitive, the girl did not cope well with grief. She cried in secret, spoke little, and soon came to be seen as difficult by relatives. Antonio, drowning in his own pain, did not know how to comfort her. Without realizing it, he slowly pulled away. A few months later, pressured by family members who claimed he was emotionally unfit to raise the child, Antonio made the most painful and mistaken decision of his life. He allowed Clara to be taken to a shelter in the city with the promise that it would be temporary. But temporary became permanent. The years passed quickly. Antonio closed himself off even more. He never remarried, never had another child. He only worked, aged, and became known as a serious, distant, and lonely man. Clara, on the other hand, grew up forgotten. At the shelter, she was never the favorite. She was not the happiest child, nor the prettiest in the eyes of those looking to adopt. While other children were chosen by families, Clara stayed behind. 1, 2, 3 times she watched her companions say goodbye, while she remained sitting on the same bench, hugging the same worn-out teddy bear. Over time, she stopped asking about her father. In her teenage years, she became even more invisible. Adults said she was too quiet, too sad, and so no one wanted Clara. No one chose that girl with deep eyes and a wounded heart. When she turned 18, she received a small suitcase with a few clothes and an address written by hand, her father's old farm. It was all she had. Returning was not easy. When she arrived, Clara found a man she barely recognized. Antonio was older, bent by time and loneliness. His hair was gray, his face marked with deep wrinkles, his eyes tired. It took him a few seconds to understand who that young woman standing before him was. "Father?" she said, her voice trembling. At that moment, Antonio felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. His entire past collapsed upon him like a storm. Guilt, regret, shame, everything came at once. He tried to speak but couldn't. He simply opened his arms and cried like he hadn't cried in nearly 20 years. The reunion was silent, awkward, and painful. Father and daughter were strangers sharing the same roof. In the first days, they barely spoke. Clara helped around the house, cooked meals, watched her father from a distance. Antonio looked at her secretly, trying to recognize in that woman the little girl he had once abandoned. But something began to change. Little by little, Clara started accompanying her father on the farm. She learned about cattle, about the land, about the seasons. Antonio, in turn, began telling stories about Helena, about the past, about the mistakes he had made. One night, sitting on the porch, Clara finally asked what she had always wanted to know. "Why did you leave me?" Antonio took a deep breath, his eyes filled with tears. "Because I was weak, because I let pain defeat me, and because I wrongly believed you would be better off away from me." Clara cried, but for the first time, it was not a cry of abandonment. It was a cry of release. From that day on, something rare began to bloom, a love rebuilt. Not the perfect love of fairy tales, but a real love, full of flaws, forgiveness, and learning. Antonio began caring for Clara as he never had before. He supported her studies, encouraged her dreams, listened to her fears. Clara, in turn, brought life back into the house. She planted flowers in the forgotten garden, opened windows, and filled the rooms with music. The farm, once silent, began to breathe again. Neighbors started commenting on how the old farmer had changed. He smiled more, walked taller, spoke proudly of his daughter. "This is Clara," he would say, "my greatest harvest." Years later, when Antonio fell ill, it was Clara who cared for him day and night. She held his hand through the hardest moments and never left his side. Before passing, Antonio looked at his daughter and said, his voice weak but full of truth, "The greatest mistake of my life was leaving you, and the greatest miracle was that you came back." Clara smiled through her tears. "I never stopped being your daughter, Father. I was only waiting for you to see me." Antonio passed away in peace, and Clara stayed. She stayed with the farm, with the memories, with pain transformed into love. She stayed with the certainty that even when no one wanted her, true love always finds its way back. And so, on that simple and quiet land, the most beautiful love story was born, not between a man and a woman, but between a father who failed and a daughter who chose to forgive.